YouTubers? Yeah, it's Jgsf1987 back again. Um, yeah. So, two things. One, yeah, the Democrats certainly got trashed in last Tuesday's election. That's a fact. And we're gonna see what the Republicans plan to do now that they have control of both congressional chambers. This is, I'll admit, besides me being disappointed and pissed about this, well, it's a midterm, and generally, if you think about it historically, Democrats, well, those within the Democratic base at least, the core Democratic base, well, I would say outside of the core Democratic base, they don't vote in midterms. It's just a fact of what happens. Anyway, that's a that's kind of a side note. Now, one of the reasons that I'm actually really, really scared is that, again, for those of us who are on, Obamacare, Medicare, planning to go on a Medicare, planning on, trying to pay down student loans, look, we're screwed. But that's only the very mild part of it. The good news is that at least President Obama is going to continue fighting on our behalf and at least try to bring the Republicans, at least that's what he thinks he's going to try to do, is bring them into the center. Chances are that's not going to happen. They're going to get more radical. And this is going to get potentially very serious, I mean, especially as we all begin to look forward towards 2016. I'm saying this with a lot of candor in one sense. With the new voter ID laws that have just been approved in, say, in like North Carolina, for example, if that's the standard that the Republican governed states are going to go by, we're screwed because then we can't exercise our main participatory way of making ourselves heard, which is our vote. Since the Republicans know they can't win any of the issues on the merits, how do you go about winning elections? Decrease the electorate. Make it so this way only those who you want to vote can vote, and everyone else has no say. As much as I really, 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 really am against that idea to no end, because everybody should have a voice. I mean, it's just how it is. I can sort of see the genius behind it at the same time. I'm not saying it's right. Oh no, by all means, I think it is the stupidest thing they could do. But at the same time, I'm not entirely surprised that they're pulling that kind of stunt either. I mean, look, just expect 2016 to be rigged. That's all I'm going to tell you. As much as you want Hillary or one of the Democrats to be holding on to the presidency, I'm going to say flat out right now that's not going to happen. And that won't happen at any other time Well, I'm not going to make that bold of a statement saying that it's not going to happen in any other time in our lifetimes. I'm not going to say that. But let's just say for quite a while, we're not going to see a Democrat in the presidency. I would say that the Republicans are going to have, just based on just based on how they've managed to get the electorate set, based on the way that they can start setting up the electorate the way that they see fit, they're going to be in power for quite a while. Just expect that. And with the Republican Congress, well, expect them not to do anything. They're not going to do anything. They'll just rubber stamp whatever the. They're just going to be a rubber stamp, and just expect that. For those of you who have parents or yourselves that are going on a Medicare, if there's a Republican in the presidency, be prepared for a voucher system. That's all I can tell you. Because they're not going to veto that legislation. President Obama will veto the legislation. They can just shelve it until there's a new Republican president in or a potential new Republican president in 2017, and that'll be the end of the story. The good news is, though, is that if the Democrats are able to hold their own, that's a big if. They'll be able to win back some of the seats that they lost back in 2010. I'm talking about seats in states like Wisconsin, Illinois, Pennsylvania. Heck, they can even pick up that other Senate seat in New Hampshire for that matter. It will bring them back into the majority. Not by a long shot. I mean, they could potentially pick up the other Senate seat in Iowa, the other Senate seat in Kentucky. There's a chance they could do it in Idaho, but I'm not holding my breath in that sense. They could have a chance potentially in Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, potentially if there's a big enough, yeah, provided there's a big enough vote for it. But again, I'll be very, very clear with the way that the electorate is going to be set up. I'm not counting on a Democrat being in the presidency at all. We're going to be fighting for quite a while, all of us, just trying to make it from day to day. President Obama, he came into office, was absolutely correct in fighting these forces of the corrupt status quo that we have. By all means, did he want to fight it? He's had some successes. I'll give him that. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, yeah. I'll be very clear. The way it's structured, unless they can tweak it, eh, it's a recipe for disaster. The way that it's set up is not going to sustain itself. And it's not just because of all the core challenges. The core challenges are kind of a side note, and I'm leaving them to the side for a big reason. They have an impact, but it's only the impact in how they are implemented. That's about it. As for my primary concern, though, is that it may end up potentially getting repealed once the president, President Obama leaves office. That's my primary concern, and that we're all going to go back into the old system, which essentially left it so this way, if we got sick, we were screwed, and that we should never we should never have the right to even be at a doctor because going to the doctor should be the privilege of the very, very wealthy. That's how they want to see it as, which is stupid. How can you deny somebody a basic human necessity? I don't get it. Here's another thing I honestly don't get. I mean, what the heck are the Republicans in Congress thinking that if we don't talk about, say, climate change, that nothing will happen? I'm telling you, these some of these people are some of the people in Congress. I'll be very, very honest, are on another planet. It's just what you're dealing with. Until you can get the idiocy out of Congress, you're not going to get anywhere. And idiocy may reign for quite a while. So they're not evil. I'm not going to say that they're evil. No, it's just you got to understand that ignorance sometimes has its can sometimes be a lot more powerful than people actually understand. My primary concern is that if the Republicans try to do anything at the moment, at least while President Obama is still in office, is to try and, especially in foreign policy, that's where I get really concerned because the Republicans are going to be pushing for the president to do something about basically militarily reining in the Russians. I could see that happening very easily. That's a rather that is a stupid move. The Russians have the biggest nuclear weapon stockpile of anybody in the world. It's bigger than ours. Anybody who you don't even have to watch the news to know this. You don't have to look online to know this. You just know from your own. You just if, hey, you remember back in the '80s, when Reagan had said something about arms control, particularly nuclear nuclear proliferation control. You all remember this. So it's not rocket science that the Russians have more than we do, but the two of us have the biggest nuclear arsenals in the entire world. And we can annihilate each other several times over. I'm not arguing that. So for figures like John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and others, you know, calling for a nuclear war with Russia, those guys are insane. Pure and simple. They just want another war because they figure it'll pump up their campaign donations. That's not something to take that lightly. Not at all. And I can sort of understand why Putin is a Well, I know why Putin is saying what he's saying. He's saying to them, guys, what you're proposing to do is exceedingly stupid. Guys, if you have concerns about our nuclear arsenal, just talk to us. We'll be more than happy to try and address some of your concerns. That's been the Russian position ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's been the position ever since, Gorbachev left office. It's been the position between the two of us. I mean, but the Russians aren't stupid. They also understand that given the current climate that's coming out of that's coming out of us, particularly out of the Republicans, there's no reason to keep any of these arms control treaties in force, especially when you have the one part of the other side basically calling for nuclear war because of their who have this apocalyptic mindset. Their conclusion is very logical, as is ours, which is that these guys are nuts. So I would expect to hear more back and forth, particularly a very nasty back and forth, almost like war drum beating back and forth between us and the Russians. I can really see that happening over the next couple of years. And I can only see that getting worse as time goes on, especially with a Republican in the presidency. I don't mean to scare you, but this is just what we're dealing with. This is a John Birch Republican Party that we're dealing with. The last thing I'm going to say is essentially on the subject of the Middle East in particular. What I'm heartened by is that there's a number of, you know, American Jews who are waking up to the fact that what Israel's doing is completely and totally suicidal by continuing on and then taking essentially the you talk to us, we nuke you approach by the government, particularly under the direction of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. If they're demanding the right to build settlements in the areas that the Palestinians are clamoring for to build a state, there can't be no Palestinian state. Netanyahu knows this. Netanyahu is saying essentially Palestinians do not deserve a state and therefore they need to be annihilated. That's been the that's been Netanyahu's position from the very beginning. It's no wonder the Palestinians had to go through the UN. It's no wonder that they're trying to that they're. It's also no wonder that the Obama administration's patience in this sense is really wearing thin. Our patience should be wearing thin. We tried to help them find a way of ending the deadlock and ending this deadlocking violence. Nothing seems to get through to Netanyahu at this point that perpetual warfare with the Palestinians will cause mass suffering on both sides. Abbas has said this numerous times. Think about it. Omert, who, despite his corruption, trial said the same thing. We need to end this cycle of violence. It is getting us nowhere. Obama's even said, we got to end the cycle of violence. It's not. It is putting U.S. national security in grave danger. So there's a massive incentive to do this. The Palestinians want to do this. The Palestinians, they're willing to leave the Israelis alone. Most of them don't even support Hamas. I mean, they don't. Most of them don't even support these militias. These violent militias at all. They want to live in peace, just like the Israelis want to live in peace. But if you have but once you have Zionist extremists running the show, and some of them using and quoting the Torah to basically justify genocide, in my eyes, that's a major problem. You need to get these religious fanatics. You need you need to cut off the microphone to them, because all they're going to do is incite others to commit acts of unthinkable violence. This goes on the Palestinian side too. This goes on the It's not just us Jews. Think about the Christians. I mean, not all Christians, but many of these like apocalyptic ones is, I think, probably a better way of putting it. You know, some of the more extreme ones calling for crusades, basically. Like some within the evangelical community. Not all evangelicals are preaching violence here. I'm going to say that right now. I know some people who are conservative Christian, and by no means are they. Well, same thing with Muslims. I mean, even same thing with Jews. I mean, most most of us in all these Abrahamic religions are not violent. That's just a simple truth. It's about 10% of us that are going that if we have a microphone, will incite the other 90% to commit ungodly acts of violence. So it really doesn't matter in my eyes. Be it Judaism, be it Islam, be it Christianity. Speaking of Islam, I mean, apparently the head of ISIS, I think, was really badly hurt in some, I think it was a U.S. led bomb strike or something. I don't know. I mean, it's a matter of, we're gonna have to figure out online also, like, what had happened. I mean, it'll it'll pop up at one point or another. I'll also conclude on my own end by saying, yeah, I am thinking a lot about, like, you know, how to move on also with the rest of my life, and it's, some of it is anxiety inducing, some of it isn't. I mean, we all do what we gotta do. Anyway, seeing that this video is almost 25 minutes long, I'm gonna cut it off. Anyway, this is Jgsf1987 out.